So this is going to be a list of the best incantations per area that you can go and pick up. Note that I'm not including prayer book incantations, and I can do a separate video for that, but this is going to be all the incantations that as you go through an area, you can run, pick up, or snag from a boss fight. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Now the best incantation you can get when you enter Limgrave is going to be from the Church of Dragon Communion, and that is going to be ragonMaw. This incantation can do absolutely crushing damage. It can be boosted by the Dragon Communion seal as well as the Rock Heart, and you are going to get an insane amount of hyper armor once you start the animation and the dragon's crushing jaws hit your enemy. This is going to be doing 45 stance damage and has the ability to knock enemies down. You also have decent control with this incantation and can move the head from enemy to enemy pretty well. The recovery time for this incantation is about 2 seconds, but considering you can knock most enemies over, that's not a problem at all. You also are going to get a nice lunge forward as you're using this incantation, allowing you to start it a little farther away so that you can get in on your enemies quickly. And just a side note here, if you are planning on using this incantation heavily, I also suggest pairing it with the Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, as you are definitely going to get hit while using this particular incantation. Now in Weeping Peninsula, you're going to want to grab the Flame of Frenzy. Now this incantation, for how early you get it in the game, is absolutely phenomenal. It can be chargeable and it's going to cause madness buildup on you a little bit, but the damage that you can get from it definitely outweighs that cost. It only requires 16 faith to use. It is going to deal a decent amount of stance damage as well, so you will be getting some stance breaks with this incantation if that's what you decide to do. But depending on how fast or slow you want to use this incantation, it needs to be noted that you cannot chain cast this incantation. You can do an uncharged version, however you can't spam cast this over and over again. Now you can boost the damage even farther with the Flame of Frenzied Seal, and since it's fire damage, you can also use the Fire Scorpion Charm and the Flame Shrouding Cracked Tear. Now one thing I definitely have noticed though with this incantation is you're pretty much firing for effect, not for pinpoint damage, and there is definitely possibilities that you can miss your enemies while using this. Now moving on through Stormveil Castle, there is only one incantation here, but we're gonna cover it anyway because it is technically the best in this area, and that is the aspect of the Crucible Horns. Now the aspect of the Crucible Horns is gonna allow you to summon horns from the Crucible on your shoulder and charge in and stab your enemy. You can use this either charged or uncharged, meaning you can use the Godfrey icon to boost that damage by 15%. Now, you can also boost it with the Crucible Axe or Crucible Tree set, which is going to boost it by another 16%, 4% for each piece. And I find that the damage you can get out of this incantation is quite satisfying. You are also going to be able to stun lock most of your enemies, as this incantation is going to shoot them off into the air, allowing you to close the gap and start hitting with your weapon. Crucible Horns is also going to provide a considerable amount of stance damage, meaning it will be extra easy to pair this with a stance break build because you will be breaking stances constantly. Now moving through Stormveil Castle to Liurnia of the Lakes, there are 2 incantations here that are absolutely amazing. However, I can only choose one, so in my opinion, the best incantation you can get in Liurnia of the Lakes is Howl of Shabriri. Now the other incantation, Frenzied Burst, is also absolutely amazing, but I chose Howl of Shabriri here because it's used to enhance every single aspect of your build. It is going to give you a plus 25% increase in your damage, however you are going to take an extra 30% damage, and that does make this incantation a little bit higher on the skill cap, but adding more damage to your build and being able to use other incantations that are boosted by that damage boost just made more sense to say Howl of Shabriri was the best incantation in this area. As you enter Caelid, you're going to pick up Flame Grant Me Strength. This is by far the best incantation here, and let me explain why. The other option is Pest Threads, and even though Pest Threads is insanely great against really large bosses, that is a very niche incantation, whereas Flame Grant Me Strength has been used in almost every single one of my builds to give yourself more damage and or fire damage with some extra stamina increase. Flame Grant Me Strength is going to give you plus 20% physical damage, plus 20% fire damage, and plus 11.1% stamina recovery speed, all for just 15 faith. This incantation can be used at the very beginning of the game and has the ability to make you completely busted. It also can stack with Golden Vow, which is the obvious buff duo that everybody knows, but Flame Grant Me Strength is just too good of an incantation to pass up in Caelid, as it is used by almost every single build. Next up, we'll make our way to Altus Plateau, and Scouring Black Flame is going to be the best incantation that you pick up here. It's going to be dropped from the Godskin Apostle in Domina Village, and you are going to be able to boost the damage with any fire damage perks. Now, Black Flame is very interesting in Elden Ring, as it's going to deal a percentage of the enemy's max health, and charging is going to increase that damage even farther. Now, with Scouring Black Flame, you are going to get a huge fan of flames right in front of you that actually cover a pretty good distance and will give you a very wide breadth when it comes to what your incantation hits. I find that against a bunch of smaller enemies, even just bigger bosses, this incantation does a great job at dealing a really good amount of damage, as well as covering a lot of ground. You can also use things like the Godslayer's Seal in order to boost the damage even farther, as well as the Radagon's Icon to shorten the casting time, and the Godfrey Icon in order to boost that charge damage. And out of all the Black Flame incantations, this one is definitely one of the best. Now, once you get into Grail's Dragon Burrow, which is just south of Caelid, you're going to get the Stone of Gurranq. This, in my opinion, is one of the coolest incantations that has ever come to us in Elden Ring. You can spam cast this, it's going to do a ton of stance and stamina damage, and it also does a really good amount of physical damage as well. It is going to be boosted with the Clawmark Seal, which is going to boost your bestial incantations, and in my opinion, this matches up perfectly with a plethora of other incantations, as you can cast it quickly and then move around and continue to cast as necessary. Now, the one thing you do need to watch out for when using this incantation is the fact that it has very little tracking. Now, because of that, it's best used at mid to close range, and the other notable attribute of this incantation is the fact that it does have a very small area of effect when it does explode, so you can hit multiple smaller targets next to each other. Now, when heading into Mount Gelmir, there really is only one correct answer, and it's an incantation that doesn't do any damage. The best incantation in Mount Gelmir is going to be Golden Vow. You see, once you have 25 faith, you have access to this absolutely phenomenal incantation. Golden Vow is going to give you plus 15% damage and plus 10% all damage negation. It's going to last 80 seconds and can be extended with the Old Lord's Talisman, and will also pair seamlessly with Flame Grant Me Strength. Now, the reason I think this incantation deserves to be on this list is even if I don't have 25 faith in a build, I will use the Ash of War version, so I do have Golden Vow available. This is a must for any build that is put together in Elden Ring, and if you can spare the 25 faith, the incantation is going to give you a lot more damage and damage negation than the Ash of War will. That being said, Shadow of the Erd Tree brought us the Golden Vow item that we can craft. However, this once again will not be as good as the incantation is when it comes to your increased damage and increased damage negation. Now, within the consecrated snowfields, you're going to have to go kill Theodirx so you can get a few dragon hearts in order to go to a Church of Dragon Communion and pick up Theodirx's magma. This is by far one of the best Dragon Communion incantations, and the damage cap for this particular sorcery is incredibly high. Not only do you get a one-part incantation, but there's also a follow-up attack, and it leaves a giant pool of magma on the ground, which of course can be boosted by the Talisman of the Dread, making this incantation just that much better. Now, some of you may be thinking, why not use Magma Breath? Because it's cheaper when it comes to how many hearts you need. Well, on average, this incantation is going to deal 40% more damage than Magma Breath. And another interesting thing about this incantation is you can cast it from horseback. And lastly, if you want yet even more damage, you definitely want to equip the Rock Heart, as this is going to skyrocket your damage and allow you to hit incredibly hard. Now, once you get down to the Ainzel River, you are going to want to pick up Frozen Lightning Spear. This incantation is a phenomenal way not only to crack off some crazy lightning damage, but also build up frost. As we know, once you get frost to proc on your enemy, they're going to get a debuff that allows them to take 20% more damage. You also have a very wide breadth of this incantation, meaning you can hit a variety of areas and hit multiple enemies at the same time with not only the first initial strike, but the following lightning strikes afterward. I personally enjoy using this in New Game Plus only because I can use 2 Gravelstone Seals that are going to boost the damage by 30% in total. You also are going to get some very nice hyper armor in this Incantations build-up, because unless you get hit by something very big, you're not going to be knocked out of it. This incantation is definitely a must for any lightning type build that I put together, and it's just incredibly cool looking. Now, as you enter Crumbling Fair Missoula, at the very end of this area, you're going to get the Black Blade incantation from the Remembrance of Malekith. Now, this incantation is by far just an instant win button. It not only does fantastic damage, but it's also a 2-part casted incantation. You are going to be able to do an absolute ton of damage, and the Black Blade debuff is going to allow your enemy's health to burn away, as it does a % of your enemy's health, and you can continually spam this over and over again, watching your enemy or boss's health bar absolutely evaporate. Now, it is very important to remember that even though this incantation looks like fire damage, it's actually all completely holy damage. It does a little bit of stance damage, but holy damage is what you need to remember, so boosting at things with the Sacred Scorpion Charm or the Holy Shroud and Cracked Tear are definitely going to be the way to go. You also are going to get some very decent range with this incantation, and there is a considerable amount of hyper armor to take into account once you start your cast. Now, once you enter the mountaintops of the Giants, you're going to make your way all the way to the Freezing Lake, where we need to fight Borealis of the Freezing Fog. In his defeat, you will get some Dragon Hearts and have the ability to buy Borealis Mist. Now, the reason that Borealis Mist is so good is that it's going to inflict not only frostbite damage, but 110 frostbite damage per tick on its enemies. This is going to allow you to proc frostbite incredibly fast, getting that really nice debuff on your enemies, allowing them to take 20% more damage. This is also going to deal 18% more damage than its counterpart Dragon Ice, even though it is going to take a longer time to charge up. You can also boost this incantation with the Roar Medallion, allowing you to boost the damage even farther. The last thing I'll say about this incantation is it does drain your entire FP bar and will cast as long as you have FP, so combining this with something like the Cerulean Hidden Tear is definitely going to be how you play this incantation. Now, upon entering the Halig Tree, and I'm also including Elfiel in here, we are going to want to get Scarlet Aeonia. This not only is one of the coolest looking incantations, but it gives you an amount of hyper armor that I don't think any other incantation gives you. Now, this incantation is going to be received from the Remembrance of the Rot Goddess after you beat Malenia, and one of the reasons that this incantation is so good is that it applies as what's lovingly called Super Rot. Normal Scarlet Rot is only going to take off 16.2% of the max HP of your enemy, whereas Super Rot is going to tick for the same amount of time, but more HP, and that's going to give you 29.7% of the enemy's HP taken off from landing this particular incantation. You are going to have a decent build-up time, but as I said, the hyper armor is immense, so you shouldn't need to worry about that. And not only do you get an initial hit if you hit somebody with this, but the explosion that causes the Scarlet Rot to proc is also going to give you a secondary hit for more damage. This incantation is also a surefire way for you to proc your Mushroom Crown as well as your Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, allowing you to do 30% more damage, so your next Scarlet Aeonia is going to hit even harder. Now, as we move into the DLC in the raw base, you're going to grab the Knight's Lightning Spear incantation. This incantation is Lightning Spear if it was on steroids. You're going to be doing a crazy amount of damage, and you're going to get a multi-hit incantation where your first Lightning Spear is going to hit your enemy, followed up by 4 Lightning Strikes if you do a quick cast, and by 6 Lightning Strikes if you charge it, and yes, you can boost the damage even farther with the Godfrey icon. Now, the damage ceiling for this incantation is incredibly high. You can boost it with things like the Ritual Sword Talisman, the Lightning Scorpion Charm, Godfrey icon, as well as the Phlox Canvas Talisman, and if you want to add the Lightning Shroud and Cracked here, you have a recipe for some really high damage. I do feel like Knight's Lightning Strike is one of the absolute best incantations that came to us within the DLC, and you can use this to pretty much steamroll everyone. Now, the best incantation you're going to find in the Shadow Keep is going to be Fire Serpent. It's the consistency with this incantation that makes it so good, and what I mean is that this incantation does not miss. It is very spammable and it has tracking on it, which means it's going to hit any target in the area, and if you lock on a target, it will spam on that target until you burn that target down. This incantation is chargeable and it has the ability to do some stance damage, as you're going to see in this footage, so you can use it to break stances to get some very easy criticals off. There are also a ton of different items that are going to boost the damage of this incantation, like the Fire Knight Seal, as well as Mesmer's Helm and the Fire Knight Armor, and obviously it's chargeable, so the Godfrey icon will come into play, so very quickly you can boost the damage of this incantation a lot. And lastly, you are going to get some very decent range with this incantation, so you can spam from afar or you can charge up a few good bursts until your enemy closes in, at which case you can burn them down with your weapon. Now, in the raw ancient ruins, you're going to encounter Pest Thread Spears, and imagine Pest Threads just better in every single way. Pest Thread Spears is going to be a chargeable incantation that is going to do a ridiculous amount of stance damage and a ton of damage to massive enemies. This incantation is really awesome against dragons, the Elden Beast, anything large where a ton of these targets can hit at one time. Not only that, but the tracking on Pest Thread Spears is absolutely god tier, and you get a really nice amount of range, so you can sit back, as you're seeing here in this footage, and just spam cast this until your boss or enemy is down. This is a chargeable incantation, and you can also spam cast it, which just adds to the fun and overall feel of using Pest Thread Spears. Now, the next area we're going to pick up an incantation in is going to be Shadow Altus. You are going to pick up the Golden Arcs incantation here, which require you to have 22 faith, and each projectile is going to do 5 stance damage, with a total of 15 stance damage if all 3 projectiles hit your enemy. This is going to be solely holy damage, so it's going to be pretty decent throughout most of the game, but will fall off hard at the very end on the last few bosses. Now, you can boost this damage actually pretty considerably with the Spiral Tree Seal, which is going to boost it by 20%, and then also if you decide to charge it, you can boost it with the Godfrey icon by an extra 15. Overall, this incantation is going to give you some very decent damage. Now, in my personal opinion, I absolutely love to spam cast this incantation, as you can get the golden arcs out very fast, and before your enemy can get to you, you can already put out some really nice damage. There is also going to be some minor tracking to the golden arcs that you are shooting out, so that's also something to take into account when using this incantation. Now, in the Stone Coffin Fissure, you are going to find a Misbegotten Crusader who will drop multi-layered Rings of Light. This is going to be another holy damage incantation that is chargeable and will be able to be boosted by 15% with the Dryleaf Seal. The radius of this incantation is also going to grow the longer that it is charged, all the way up to 10% larger, and I actually really found myself enjoying this incantation. It's a very fun incantation to use. It's definitely not really spammable, but the charged up version does a lot of damage, and it is really fun for clearing out small to medium sized enemies, and I actually found it incredibly effective against larger enemies, especially if you can get multiple discus going at one time. It will sit there and absolutely shred through a ton of different boss types. Needless to say, for an incantation that was stuck down in the Stone Coffin Fissure and hidden away pretty well, this is actually a pleasant surprise, and I'm really glad that I picked it up, because I think that it's definitely going to be a lot of fun to use moving forward. Now, for this next incantation, it is located near a limb, but I don't even want to put it on this list. The only reason it's on here is because it is the best incantation in this area, because it is the only incantation in this area. Spira is absolutely hot garbage trash. If you want to snipe smaller enemies from afar with little health, that is is 100% fine. It is great for that, but everything else outside of that, it's just a complete waste. It's going to channel your FP, so it's slowly going to drain it as you stand in one spot chain casting this incantation. It's going to do holy damage and not enough stance damage to make any difference at all, and the tracking on this incantation also is very, very bad, and I'm having a hard time figuring out why the faith requirement is so high for such a mediocre to horrible incantation. I think out of all the incantations we've been over by area on this list, this is by far the absolute worst one, and I'm only including it so you know about it, but I probably wouldn't even pick this one up. Now for the very last incantation on the list, you are going to be entering the Jagged Peaks, and you are going to pick up Bayle's Tyranny, although this can be picked up from the Ultra Dragon community that is in the Jagged Peaks, so I included it on this list. Now in my opinion, the main thing that Bayle's Tyranny has going for it is going to be its aesthetic. It looks absolutely phenomenal, and it looks like it would do an absolute ton of damage. However, that's just not the case. This incantation definitely needs some work. It needs to have a ton more hyper armor, and for the amount of charge up time you get for this incantation, the damage that it outputs is actually really, really low. Not to mention the FP cost of 49 and the immense drain on your stamina. I just find that Bayle's Tyranny isn't all it's cracked up to be. Now you will get 25 stance damage from this incantation, which I guess is okay, but overall, Bayle's Tyranny definitely needs some work, and I don't think that it's really worth picking up, just like our previous incantation on the list. So that's going to be our list of best incantations by each area in Elden Ring from patch 1.16. So I appreciate you guys watching until the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for being here. Make sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification on your way out. If I missed an incantation, definitely leave it down in the comments below. And until next time, guys, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.